Good morning. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Welcome to the latest In Conversation, sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. We are speaking again with one of my favorite guys, Subhas Menon. He's the Director General of the Association of Asia-Pacific Airlines. Subha, welcome back. Good to see you, and thanks for joining me again.
Good to see you again, Matt.
Um, the biggest news now, I mean, we had, I thought we were done talking about COVID and all of this, but we now got tariffs, which are kind of throwing the aviation industry for a loop, uh, just like COVID did. Probably not quite as bad, but it's still pretty bad because we had China come in and say they weren't going to take Boeing planes and so on and so forth, but that seems to have eased somewhat in recent days. Your organization, which represents airlines throughout the Asia Pacific region, excuse me, you issued a statement, I think it was earlier this week, where you talked about the problems with supply chains and the effects on sustainability. Give us an idea of how all of that relates to the tariffs and where do you see things going?
Well, Matt, I think in a nutshell, the global supply chain crisis that we are facing now is the direct impact of the border closures during the pandemic years. So, I mean, which resulted in companies closing down, short sizing, and also a lot of redundancies. But these global supply chains, have been painstakingly built up over decades, because not every country can produce everything that you need to build a modern aeroplane or engine. So, taking advantage of the specialization and efficiencies in different countries, we have set up this very efficient global supply chain, not only for the industry but for the whole world. But all this was built on the basis of free trade. Now, if you're going to, if you're going to challenge that with obstacles placed, as far as trade is concerned, then you are going to really break all these principles asunder, right at the framework. So that is why we were concerned, with these tariffs, and these tariffs are really global tariffs. I mean, nobody is spared. Every country, is going to get these tariffs, and then these countries will reciprocate, as China did, and so that makes the supply chain crisis. Actually, we were seeing a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, before this tariffs announcements, because Boeing got out of their doldrum, and Airbus is also, doing whatever they could to speed up their production. But now it looks like the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train.
That's and you don't know when the train's going to arrive. And for me, that's part of the problem is the
Mm.
uncertainty. Uh, Stock markets want certainty. I used to make a joke that businesses like dealing with dictators because at least they have certainty. But in this case, we have a wannabe emperor in the White House, and one day he says something, and the next day he says something else. And you can't plan your business with that kind of uncertainty. Businesses are, they've got 1 year, they've got quarterly plans, they've got 1 year plans, 5 year plans, 10 year plans, so on and so, especially in aviation because production takes so long. Uh, and how do your members, how are they dealing with the uncertainty?
Well, that's the thing. We have been talking to the OEMs, to return, some certainty, to this issue. Okay, we understand supply chains, and maybe for the short term, all right, there is no easy fix. But at least they could tell the airlines, what are the critical items, and how long it's going to take to fix those critical items. Provide some predictability, to schedule planning, as well as the fleet planning that the airlines have to undertake on a regular basis. And then, of course, the long term, what do you need to do? I think the OEMs need to basically invest in their supply chains. The supply chains have suffered a lot, and the manufacturers have made huge profits in the meanwhile. So why don't they invest in the supply chains to shore up the supply chains? The problem in this industry is that there are very few competitors. So they have been really driving their suppliers very hard in the past. So now we need to invest in the supply chains to get things back, and the predictability is very important. But as you said, no dictator will survive in the US, because the markets, business sentiment, consumer sentiment will ultimately decide how the leaders behave. And I think that is why we see a little bit of a pulling back on the part of the US, especially with China, because the markets have spoken.
Well, and nobody wins a tariff war, so it
Yes, yeah.
is just ridiculous. But anyway, in your statement, we'll move on to your statement again this week. You also mentioned sustainability. I have, you call me the doubting Thomas or the doubting Matthew, whatever you want to call me about this, but I had doubts that the industry, as good intentioned as it is, I have my doubts that it's going to be net zero by 2050. Especially because you look now, they're keeping the older planes in service because they can't get newer planes that are more fuel efficient, so on and so forth. And there's, why should I pay, if I'm an airline, why should I pay, 10 times more for sustainable aviation fuel, SAF? How do we get SAF to where it needs to be, not just, I mean, globally, but also in Asia Pacific? We've seen, every week or every day almost, I get press releases. People say, oh, we're going to take, 100,000 liters of SAF or a million liters. New Zealand is looking at that. You've got companies like Neste that are investing and trying to scale up. But how does the industry get, and we all agree SAF basically is the most immediate
Mm.
benefit to the industry because nobody, hydrogen, forget about it. I wrote a column about this not too long ago. Hydrogen, you're talking about changing the whole infrastructure, not just of the plane, but airports, delivery. And is the hydrogen green hydrogen? Is it brown hydrogen? So on and so. Forget hydrogen. Electric, not going to happen anytime soon for long haul flights, for sure. I mean, if you're taking an air taxi across town, fine. But how do we get SAF to where it needs to be?
Yeah, I read your article on hydrogen and sustainable fuel. Actually, I enjoy reading your article. You just let it rip. So it's quite fun reading your article. But if you look at it, let's look at renewable diesel, right? The production and supply of renewable diesel for land transport is in the billions, whereas the production and supply of SAF is only in the millions. So what is the difference? I think the difference is that for renewable diesel, because it is country based, the governments, are very, front footed in coming up with policies, incentives, and working with the suppliers to make sure that renewable diesel is there. For example, in Thailand, there's already a 10% of renewable diesel being used for land transport, just within the space of the last 2 years. So I think that is what is really missing here. Governments, especially in our neck of the woods, are not coming up with policies, that incentivize. You need both the carrot and the stick to make sure that fuel suppliers are transitioning to renewable energy. A good example is the IRA, which the Biden administration introduced a couple of years back. The IRA has incentives for fuel suppliers, and of course also taxation if they don't produce renewable energy. And 90% of the SAF that is produced today is produced in the US. Of course, this could change with the Trump administration, but that is a good lesson for us to take. And that is what we have been talking to governments about. Already in the space of the last 12 months, 7 or 8 governments in the Asia Pacific region have come up with policies and incentives. Basically in Asia, it's a consensus model. They work with the fuel suppliers, they work with the airlines, with the airports. Also the communities. A good example is in Japan. They have a public-private partnership in Japan for the production of SAF by using used cooking oil. So I think we are moving in the right direction, and I have no doubt that this industry will get to net zero by 2050.
Okay, well, I don't gamble very much, but maybe I'll bet you $1 it doesn't. And if I'm still around in 2050, then we'll have another conversation about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just mentioned that we're keeping older planes in service, and that of course kind of circles back to the tariffs. China had earlier paused deliveries, but again, it looks like they've eased up on that. Um, do OEMs, I mean, you mentioned earlier that, OEMs like Boeing, Airbus will throw in Embraer in there and ATR and so on and so forth. Um, you know, and Boeing just got a huge order. I mean, Qatar threw them and what I call the $96 billion bone. And
Yes.
getting the orders is easy. Not easy, but getting orders is not the problem. Building the planes is the problem. And I talked to some lessors previously, and I've talked to airlines as well. And, they can't get planes now for love or money. What is
Mm.
going to be how, again, is it to boost production, to deliver on those orders? Is it a simple fact of just investing more in the supply chains?
Well, I think that is the start of it. You have to invest in the supply chains. I mean, Boeing, went back a little bit in 2024 because of the strike and all the other issues that they were facing. But they seem to be back on the feet. And I think the suppliers need also to coordinate their activities. Because whether you're talking Boeing or Airbus, many of the parts and components that they are getting are coming from the same suppliers.
Because
So
Spirit Aerosystems just made a deal.
Spirit Aerosystems,
Yeah,
yeah,
we made a
yeah,
deal where Airbus is going to get XYZ and Boeing's going to take it back and so on and so
that's
forth.
right. That's right. So I think they need to work together. I mean, industry has to work together. And they also need to support the MROs. Because the MROs are also very important. To reduce the downtime. For turning out repairs and maintenance work. So there's a series of things that have to be done right through the plant, the supply chain plant. And I think the OEMs get the picture and they are working on it. At the same time, I think the industry or maybe governments, need to also invest in multiplying the competitors in the industry. Because governments play a big part. When it comes to aviation because there is also the defense element. So they need to invest. I don't know whether you have heard of Jet Zero. They produce this, or they're going to produce a commercial aircraft, using what is known as the blended wing body
Yep, yep.
aircraft. The U.S. Air Force has been investing in them. And then you have Alaskan United Delta. They've already signed up for BWB aircraft. Test aircraft is going up in 2027. We need that sort of thing. Even COMAC. I think COMAC is too dependent on Airbus and Boeing and as well as the engine makers, to produce the aircraft. Maybe it's time, China invested in producing their own aircraft. So you really need to invest in the industry because this industry is quite integral, to everything that governments are doing, including, making sure that the economy is, are back on track and growing into the future.
Okay. Big picture, and again, let's focus on our home base here in Asia. It seems like travel has really come back. Again, now we're seeing with what's happening in the U.S. and as an American, I'm not happy about it. Uh, but travel is really, and especially international travel, Asia to the U.S., Europe to the U.S., and so on and so forth. But that is being impacted as well. Are you seeing, because I saw Walter Cho, he was talking about, I saw him on CNN the other day, and he said that he's seen a drop in traffic from South Korea to the U.S. simply because of what's happening. And, tourists are getting the third degree when they get there, when they arrive in the United States. And he's saying that, if this continues, that it could cost Korean Air, just Korean Air, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think the figure he put was $150 million a year, if not more. Um, uh, Give us an idea of what you're seeing, what your members are saying to you. What are they hoping that the association can do for them?
Yeah, well, I think the North Asian carriers are quite dependent on the U.S. traffic, and they have been seeing an impact, of everything that's happening or coming out of the U.S. But the rest of our members are not that dependent on the U.S. traffic, But it is worrying, that the U.S. is becoming more insular, and all these things, high-handed immigration officials and all that, we used to talk about it happening in other parts of the world, but happening in the U.S. is a new phenomena, But when people want to travel, they take all these things into consideration before they decide where they want to travel to. So I think the U.S. International traffic to the U.S. will suffer in the next few months, if things don't improve. But what is really encouraging is the resilience of demand generally. Of course, it'll moderate, after we have returned to pre-COVID levels. But there's still very strong growth coming out of the Asia Pacific region, whether you're talking about to Europe or you're talking about regional travel, it is very, very strong. China inbound is very strong, although the outbound hasn't recovered fully, but generally speaking, I think resilience of demand is a very encouraging sign and is held up for so many years. And when we look at our forward bookings also, they are still very, very strong. We're talking about, maybe 8 to 10% growth on a monthly basis, but that is still very good. It's like what it used to be pre-COVID.
Okay. Subhas, we need to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, Mental Trade of Hong Kong. We'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you, we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. We are talking with Subhas Menon. He's the Director General of the Association of Asia-Pacific Airlines. Subhas, we had been talking before the break about MROs, and that's interesting to me. We just did a story in the latest issue of the magazine on the MRO business, both for commercial aviation and also business aviation. Um, but again, supply chains are a problem. But is this a good time to be in the MRO business? Because you've got to bring in the older planes. They've got to go through more checks. They've got to get serviced because they're older. From where you sit now, do you see MRO growing in Asia Pacific?
I think so. I think there is a very strong need for MROs. I mean it's all got to do with airlines specializing in what they do and outsourcing the rest of it to the experts. And MROs can achieve economies of scale. Because they handle so many different airlines. So I think it is a very good equation, that MROs have with airlines, and that's not going to change, and it's going to become even stronger. With the supply chain problems, I think costs for airlines are going up. That is because the time in the shop is really increasing. Some of the airlines are telling me that it has tripled. If you send an engine in for repair or maintenance at the time that it takes. It used to take 6 months, now it's taking 18 months.
Wow.
So yeah, so that is very concerning, and that has a lot to do with the supply chains, because the MROs are also waiting for parts and components. And the other thing is that because these parts and components are aging, once the work is done, it is put back on the plane, and the plane flies, and then it comes back again because it fails immediately. So these are the problems. So from the MRO point of view, all this is good, right? I mean, it's more and more churn, more and more business. I think MRO business is really on a very strong footing.
Are they, and I'm curious about this,
Yeah.
MROs, how is their labor issue? Because a lot of people, you've got a 59, 60-year-old mechanic who's got 30 years, 40 years of experience. He started as an apprentice. He's a specialist in
Yeah, yeah.
fuel systems, or he's a specialist in landing gear. And during the pandemic, he was gone, or she was gone. The technology is getting more complicated. Um, are MROs in Asia Pacific, are they able to find the enough labor to replace what we lost in the pandemic?
Well, that's a very good question, Matt. In fact, I think that's the nub of it. During the pandemic, many experienced hands, especially technicians, were put out of work. They took the retrenchment packages, and they left. So there are two parts to it. One is the actual number, of workers. The other is the quality of the workforce. Because a lot of these things, it's what we call conventional wisdom. People have acquired this over time, and they pass it on to the next generation. So I think the whole industry is looking at how we can invest in training, to make sure that the generations that are coming through, are equipped with this information and knowledge, to handle many of the intricacies of the aviation ecosystem. And that is the big part of it that is missing. I mean, with higher wages, you can always attract a lot of people, but do they have the experience and the quality to be able to do the work that is required? So it is a challenge, and it's not only with the MROs, but I think across the board in the industry, this is a challenge, and it will take about 3-4 years before we bring through the next generation of experts, to handle the work that has to be done.
Yeah, that institutional knowledge that has been lost is really,
Yes,
really hard to replace. We're
that's
going to
right.
switch gears for a little bit because I love flying first class and business class and all that. I've been able to do that a few times. Once I got upgraded, and then the other times I've had to pay for it, but that was okay. But I noticed recently that airlines seem to be spending a lot on their premium offerings. We see that a lot. I think Korean Air again, they've been, I flew first class on them actually when I was coming back from a conference there. just upgraded myself one way, and it was okay. But the Singapore Airlines first class, for example, I flew them from Mumbai to Singapore, and I was really unhappy because it was only about a 3 or 4 hour flight. And I wanted to stay in the first class for a lot longer because it was so good. I think United mentioned that they're spending more on premium offerings. Before everybody wanted to find the cheapest ticket. And my parents, for example, whenever they flew, and they've got the money, they could afford first class or business class or whatever. But my father, he's got to have a deal. If he can't find the cheapest deal, he's not a happy camper. Do you see Asia Pacific Airlines? Is this a trend that's going to continue to upgrade these premium offerings?
Well, as we said earlier, I mean, the markets decide all these things. So when the pandemic struck, everybody, rang the death knell of premium travel. But the reality is that in 2024, for instance, leisure travel grew by 21%. Business travel grew by 18%. In revenue terms, business travel is twice what you collect from economy class. So that is really the motivation for all these investment in the premium cabins. Because there is demand for it. There's still a very strong demand for it. And people are traveling, as you say, in business class sometimes, not all the time, but every now and then they will be upgrading or they will be using their frequent flyer points. But the demand is there, and people want to travel in comfort, especially if they're traveling on business, but also if they're traveling long haul on leisure. So I think the airlines see the trends, and this has been ongoing since the borders reopened, and they see it in their forward bookings as well, and they think that it's time to invest in this as well. Even first class. I mean, new first class cabins are being rolled out also by some of the airlines.
Well, it's interesting to me. I mean, my wife, for example, and she hates it
Yeah.
when I mention her, but she flies, she's French, so she flies to Paris all the time to see her
Yes.
family. And she can't quite bring herself to do business class, but she loves and again, I'll give Singapore Airlines a shout out. She loves their premium economy, and she thinks it's a great product. The price is right. You got a little more leg room. You've got this, you've got that. So she's very happy with premium economy, and we're seeing that come up. So maybe they cut back a few economy rows, they add some more premium economy business, and then you've only got maybe four first class seats or
Yes.
suites or whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. But it's I think I agree with you. Yeah, people are wanting to spend a little bit more
That's right.
because as they say in the industry, getting there is half the fun.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Subhas, last question. It's time to get the old crystal ball out. Let's talk about what you're seeing in the industry with your membership in Asia in the next, say, 6 months through the end of the year. Is it, again, you can't predict what the guy in the White House is going to do. We've also got Ukraine, we've got Russia, which affects the airlines because you've got to reroute around certain areas. Um, how is the industry and how is our Asia Pacific Airlines going to deal with these geopolitical uncertainties? And what can Asian airlines do to improve their prospects?
Yeah, I think the general trend that we are seeing is that more and more governments, more and more countries are becoming inward looking. I mean, we achieved great strides as far as globalization was concerned. Until the pandemic struck. And now we see more and more turning the clock back and going back to protectionism and trying to safeguard the interests of each country. So I think that's not good for aviation because we are a global international business. And globalization was really up our alley, and it was working very well for the airlines. So there are challenges, but at the same time, I think Asia Pacific, is coming of age. Asia Pacific is, really growing. I mean, if you look at the global GDP, average growth is about 2 to 3%. But if you look at the Asia Pacific, you're talking about, especially the emerging economies, you're talking of upwards of 4% GDP growth. So Asia Pacific is coming up. And Asia Pacific actually is moving more towards expansionism and working with the other countries and working to build up the links to globalization. Of course, it depends on which country you're talking about. Some may want to exercise more influence than the other. But that is very good. And Asia Pacific is now the largest air transport market in the world, accounting for more than a third of all air transport globally. So I think the role for AAPA is getting stronger because Asian perspectives have to matter now. And we cannot just allow the rest of the world to dictate to Asia Pacific, what the rules of operation are. For example, if you take the European Commission, you have the EU 261, which penalizes airlines, very badly, and more governments are trying to implement this sort of regulations. So I think there's a big role for AAPA to provide more voice on behalf of our members, or more on behalf of the Asia Pacific region. So I think, yeah, I think it is not all bleak for the future. I think it is we are going to face a bit of a bump now with these tariffs and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, good sense will prevail because markets and business and consumer sentiment will decide.
We hope so. Subhas, that was
Yes.
my last question, and we're running out of time. Subhas Menon, the Director General of the Association of Asia-Pacific Airlines, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me.